Hey everyone, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We're coming to you as always courtesy of our broadcasting partner moretalk.tv. This week on the show we have a presentation from the archives. It's from Hugh Lynn Cayce this week. Hugh Lynn Cayce served his father's Association for Research and Enlightenment Incorporated as chairman of the board until his death in 1982. He was also the author of the book Venture Inward, which was an examination of safe and unsafe methods of exploring personal psychic experiences. He also authored The Outer Limits of Edgar Cayce's Power, which explores the relatively small number of Cayce readings that actually appeared to be inaccurate. The lecture we will be enjoying today is entitled The Development of Psychic Awareness, and in this presentation, Hugh Lynn discusses the definition of what it means to be psychic according to the Cayce Readings. He also goes into practical applications of psychic abilities in your everyday life. Hope everyone enjoys our presentation from Hugh Lynn Cayce on psychic development.
The development of psychic awareness, as you already know, many of you, is closely related to this subject of meditation. And we could just not discuss this afternoon anything but meditation and begin to expand this and go into it in much greater depth and find a great deal that is valuable and helpful. Without the meditation, the development of psychic awareness can, in my opinion, be a very difficult and perhaps a very unlighted road. For example, there are many ways that people become psychic without any inclination toward meditation or spiritual activity. For example, you can fall off of an 80-foot ladder and have a concussion and get up psychic. I don't advise this as the best approach to this subject. I know people who have taken a massive dose, by mistake, a massive dose of LSD, and have instantaneously had an out-of-body experience, which is quite psychic. They could perceive at a distance away from their flesh body. This is a way to instantaneously, perhaps, create some kind of psychic perception. But it was most difficult to get this individual to return to their flesh body. And it looked for a time as if this could have been a very permanent state. You may be very psychic when you're dead, but many of us want to stay on a little longer here and try to figure it out. There are approaches that I have outlined in Venture Inward, in a book section called Dangerous Doorways to the Unconscious, where I've included statement about the hallucinogenic drugs and statements about something as simple as automatic writing or Ouija boards. There are many approaches, but these are not what I would like to call the lighted paths. And so this afternoon, we need to begin to define our terms and get a background to approach this subject of the development of psychic sensitivity in a balanced, normal fashion, not becoming an abnormal or completely disintegrated personality and at the same time be psychic. Just 2 days ago, my brother was on the radio regarding his new book, Edgar Cayce on Atlantis. And a telephone call came in. It was from a Navy family. They had a 4-year-old child that they thought was psychic. What should they do? He suggested that they come and talk to me, even though I was leaving the next day. I saw in my office one of the most charming, one of the most delightful young men you could lay your eyes on. he climbed up in my lap almost immediately, and we discussed his psychic ability. 4 years old. He was a charming little boy. And he may indeed, though I suspected his mother is pushing him a little bit, and I cautioned her about it, he may indeed apparently have some psychic sensitivity. But how can you get a child to grow with this kind of sensitivity and not become distorted, not become greedy, not become desirous of money and fame and position? How can you keep a child normal and balanced and still have psychic sensitivity? How can you, as an individual right now, starting from this point, do anything about psychic sensitivity if you decided that you wanted to, and still maintain a normalcy and a kind of balance in this world that is already in a seeming state of chaos? That's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. Now, first, let's look at the definition of psychic as Edgar Cayce uses it. I could spend the entire afternoon on this point, and in developing how he suggests that the psychic capacity works through the average individual. But we need to move on into the practical aspects of this, and so I must simply postulate these for you, set them up here like figures back of me, statements, ideas, against which I hope you will evaluate, will measure what I have to say for the rest of the afternoon. Over here, let's put a background, a drop, a statement from the Edgar Cayce Readings that which he calls the psychic is of the spiritual nature, the soul of man. That what we are seeing and sensing in our day is the activity, the movement of the human soul, breaking through the crust, the surrounding, the shell, if you will, that it has put about itself, that this psychic sensitivity is breaking through this soul nature, this spiritual nature, and that this is basically what the psychic is, the soul, the real self. Now, of course, the phenomena that is produced as this soul moves and operates through and extends beyond the five senses becomes a variety of phenomena. Everything from the telekinesis to the business of telepathy or clairvoyance or precognition, or all of the faculties of the mind-spirit factor of man reaching through and pushing beyond normal sense perception. But in essence, Edgar Cayce's definition is simply that it relates to the soul, the psychic nature, the psychic capacity of man, is the spiritual nature of man in movement, in activity. Second, over here, may I put a backdrop of an idea that again would require, and there is at least one doctor in the audience here with whom I have spent hours talking about this idea out of the Edgar Cayce Readings, the concept that the psychic nature, that the soul operates through specific spiritual centers in the body. The endocrine gland system, if you will, the ductless glands, called in the Hindu concepts that you know a little bit about, some of you a great deal more than I do perhaps, the whole business of the chakra, or the centers of light. Against that now, these are 7 specific centers, 7 specific glandular areas through which the various psychic capacity, the soul capacity begins to move and function, and these glands, these endocrine gland centers, are related to all psychic activity, all psychic expression. Now this is most fascinating and interesting, because if it is true, you can immediately see how easy it would be to upset the balance of normalcy in regard to psychic activity. And you can see certain cautions and certain need for balance here. For as you well know, you hardly know you've got an endocrine gland, a ductless gland, unless something's wrong with it. and then you are almost instantaneously in a state of physical, emotional, and mental chaos if it gets out of shape. Just a little extra of any of those hormones, and you're in quite a state. Now, if it is true, as Edgar Cayce says, that this is the soul, and that it functions through 7 spiritual centers. You say, what are you talking about, endocrine glands and spiritual centers? Well, you have to come to the beach this summer and get into this in real detail if you want to get with the back. But we are talking about the sex glands in the body. We're talking about the cells of Leydig that are the balance between the male-female principle in the body. We're talking about the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys. We're talking about the thymus center at the heart area. We're talking about the thyroid and parathyroid. The only one, by the way, mentioned in all of Rand's literature, connected with that I have read, that associates the endocrine centers, any endocrine center, with psychic ability or capacity. A boy who had an overactive thyroid and who could call cards like all get out until they corrected his thyroid condition and his ability dropped off completely. Now, we're talking also about the pineal gland in the top and back of the head. We're talking about the pituitary center. These 7 gland centers. Now, here they are over here. Here is the concept of the spiritual nature of man, the soul of man, and these remarks, remember, please, are against this background. The first steps that you and I should take, and I would refer you to no less authority than Elsie's 8th chapter in her book, Meditation Gateway to Light, for this. It is a quotation from an Edgar Cayce reading, complete on the subject of meditation, the 8th chapter. The place to begin with psychic sensitivity is with balance in the physical body. Balance in the physical body. What do you mean, you say balance? You and I are eating and taking things into the body. We are failing to use the body in the way that it should be in a variety of ways. You try to develop psychic sensitivity without balance in this flesh body, and you'll be in trouble. You must come to face and accept the idea, as Edgar Cayce puts it this way, the body of an entity is the temple of the living God. To live, to be, and to maintain bodily activity unto the glory of the creative forces is the purpose of the existence of each entity into material consciousness. Each soul in the temple of the living God. But be more mindful of the body, for the body's sake, that it may be a better channel for manifesting spiritual truths. Or as he puts it in another reading this way, there is as much of God in the physical as in the spiritual or mental, for it should be considered as one. This oneness of energy, this oneness of all force runs throughout all these Edgar Cayce readings. It is not an easy concept to come to grips with for you and me who think of ourselves as a little hunk of matter that's somehow out of kilter, and who have never seen a soul running around loose, most of us, without something attached to it that you could pinch and that would holler if you pinched it in the right places. Now, this concept of the flesh and the importance of the balance of the physical body is so important in this concept of developing sensitivity. The place to begin, perhaps, is with that booklet back there on the table of the normal diet, or with those recipes in the other booklet that have to do, that are put together by members that involve the system of diet outlined in the Edgar Cayce readings. The place to begin is the cutting out of that food, that one food, take it one at a time, that you know isn't any good for you. Now, I suspect that everybody in this room could think of one thing that they're eating that is not good for them. That's where you have to begin. And of course, most of us, to avoid doing anything about that, rush hither and thither, reading this book, going to this lecture, discovering another pattern from somebody else that won't mention that thing we don't want to give up. We all know where to begin, but it is the beginning that is the difficult step. So it is this beginning to discipline the self at the level of the body. Yes, not only the food that one takes, but everything else you take into the body. If in your opinion at this point it is not good for you, if it is hurting you, if it is causing you to be out of balance, then stop and begin one step at a time. Because if at the same time you follow Elsie's suggestion and begin meditation, as you move in consciousness, you will not only know what else the next step should be, but you will be able to stop, which is even more important. You will have the will, the ability to make the choice and make it stick. Now, there is need also for us to balance at the level of exercise, at the level of how we treat our body. Actually, it involves a whole attitude about the body. It is a wholesomeness in terms of the attitude toward the body as the temple of God, toward the body as a part of the soul that's showing, if you will, in three dimensions. The attitude of the body not being something that's like a mousetrap that you got caught in and that you're trying to escape from, or that you're trying to hopefully run away from. When I die, I'll never be back. I don't want to bother with the body. I'm going to have a new one you're going to have one that looks very much like the one you got now. And it's going to have a lot of the aches and pains and the troubles that you've got now. Because you love these so much, you won't turn them loose. You're going to take them right along with you. And this is a very interesting point of view that a lot of psychical research is producing for us. So let's begin now in understanding the right kind of attitude and the balance that is necessary for this body. We must begin to sense how important to the discipline of the body as it relates to the discipline of the mind. In this 8th chapter that I've mentioned here, one of the first steps is the discipline of the body, the discipline of the mind. Now let's move to this mind discipline. If you and I are going to begin the development of psychic sensitivity, the place to begin is in the control of the thought patterns that we hold every moment of every day. You say, now what in the world are you talking about? If I'm going to be psychic, I'll just rush off and be psychic, and I'm going to keep on thinking like I darn please. I'm enjoying my prejudices and my hates and my fears and my self-depreciation and my egotism, and I'm not about to turn these loose. All right. Then you can become, as you develop this psychic sensitivity, a monster. And you can destroy not only yourself, but lots of other people in the process. Edgar Cayce says very simply that thoughts are the food that the soul feeds on in the earth. What kind of food are you and I supplying our minds? What kind of thought forms are we building? This man projects into his thousands of readings an amazing idea of thought forms being far more real than we can possibly imagine at this point. I said on television this morning something I've been saying for a long time. For example, this microphone existed in somebody's mind. It had to be a mental pattern. It had to be a thought form, a constructed thought pattern, before it could ever been put on a drawing board, before it ever could have been made out of all of the physical components that make it up now, the matter components. Now, that thought is far more real and lasting than this microphone here. As fine as it is, it will perhaps deteriorate before the thought deteriorates from which it was created. And that thought existed in a mind. Now you and I are constantly building thought forms and feeding them, keeping them alive with additional thought. And if we do this at a negative level, and also become psychic, we do indeed become involved in a most catastrophic kind of destruction of ourselves and our fellow man. Some of you have never heard me speak like this before about the importance of these balances and the beginning with the disciplines of the body and the mind if we're going to work with psychic sensitivity. I go around this country talking to people and working with people who have psychic ability, all kinds, little ones and big ones, from the top to the bottom, all kinds, who are using and misusing psychic capacity. And I see as never before the importance of, particularly where children are involved, because they have such tremendous capacities, some of them, the importance of this beginning to balance the body and the mind if we are to grow in this kind of psychic sensitivity. It's extremely important. The thought form then that we create, you say, what do you mean by thought form? If you could see the thought forms around yourself, I suspect that you might be frightened. Some of you, they are like the devils. And I think that most of our devils are the shadows of our thought forms on the wall of our mind. It is so important that we realize what we must do as we begin to cleanse the mind. What does that mean? You say, well, what am I going to do? What do I do next? You have to begin where you are. I have to begin where I am. Each one of us has to begin according to his understanding of a negative thought pattern. And stop. Stop feeding the hate, the fear, the greed, the lust, the anger. Stop before it is too late, and we produce in mass a catastrophe. For we are responsible for the self and for our neighbor. You see, it is exactly this that happened, perhaps, according to Edgar Cayce, a long time ago. That man began to be able to use the great energies of the mind and spirit, to tap them and begin to create. And so as he began, along with his creation came his hates and his fears, and so he destroyed himself. You must not do this to yourself, and you must not do it to the people around you. One of the ways we do this all the time is through the enjoyment of our negative emotions. Nowhere, it seems to be, in all of the Edgar Cayce readings, is there such parallel with the Gurdjieff Fospinski material as there is in this consideration of the damage that we all do, the love that we have for our negative emotions. Do you know, and I know some of you will say, no, I don't do this, and you can't be right. Well, think about it again. Do you know that we all have a tendency to enjoy being afraid, getting angry, but we enjoy hate, that we enjoy these negative emotions of self-pity, and we must stop feeding this kind of thought pattern. If we want health, mental, physical, emotional health, and especially if we're going to move toward the development of any kind of psychic sensitivity, the result would be chaos quickly in our lives, and has been, and you can read it in the annals, has been for those who have tried to hold on to the psychic and hold on to the negative emotions at the same time. But you say, how do I do this? I want to, but how do I do it? How do I begin? Well, there are several points, but let me give you three that I think can help us all. These come directly from the Edgar Cayce Readings. They are simple procedures that will require a great deal of work. First, we must set some ideals and purposes. Clearly define our ideals and our purposes and keep looking at them. Keep appraising our thought and our actions, our work against those ideals and purposes. Not sort of created in a little bit in the mind, but put down on paper where we can erase them and change them and work with them and watch them grow and can measure our thought, our words, our acts against those ideals and purposes. I'm talking about ideals and purposes for our entire excuse for existing in the earth. Why? Why are we here? What are we here for? What are we doing here? Now, these ideals and purposes, if we will define them and put them down for the physical, for the mental, for the spiritual self, we can begin to determine who we are and where we are. And then we will have something against which to measure, to measure these. Now, we must begin, of course, to work with prayer and meditation. I won't touch the meditation because Mrs. Sechrist has already dealt with it so beautifully. But we must make this a part of the discipline of our daily experience. Without it, there isn't much hope for the growth of consciousness, for the growth of the will, in order to make the choices that we need to make. But we need too, I think, on this other hand, we need prayer. We need prayer for self. Have you ever thought that the place to begin to pray for anything is with yourself? You know, when we don't understand something like a dream, when we don't understand the action of a neighbor, when we can't sense a friend's, the disappointment in a relationship of a friend or one that we love, pray, not about them, but about ourselves first, in order to understand, in order to see more clearly the picture. And when we can begin to pray at this level for the self, coupled with the meditation, the consciousness will begin to change. We can then begin to exercise these wonderful capacities of prayer for forgiveness for ourselves. You can't forgive your wife or your husband or your neighbor until you can forgive yourself, until you can live with yourself as a human being. You know this, then begin with these prayers for the self. Begin also then to pray for others. But perhaps more important than all, begin this prayer for that you may better represent the creative energy in the earth, God. There's an affirmation in the Search for God book, an affirmation for one of those chapters, for one of those essays there, that ends with, "Help thou mine unbelief in my God, in my neighbor, in myself." With prayer then, coupled with the meditation, not at the same time, but as another pattern, begin to work with all of the various kinds of prayer, of forgiveness, of praise and adoration, which ties you into the creative energy of the universe, of prayers of confession that help you look at and face the self so that you know what to pray about. There's so many dimensions of prayer that we don't often touch it and work with it in depth as we should. Finally, Edgar Cayce urges us to get together with a few entities, a few spirits, a few souls going in the same direction. The small group. It doesn't take but one or two or three, really, but a handful that can meet in a home once a week. The value of the small group in the spiritual search, in this creating sensitivity, the small group that can give you a renewed sense of opportunity for serving, because you begin to care and meditate with and pray with and work with and listen to. Oh, if you can do a small group, you learn how to listen. More you learn how to listen, or you'll kill each other in the first 2 or 3 months. And as you learn how to listen in that small group, by golly, you'll be able to go home and listen to that child or even to that husband or wife, in a new way and hear them for the first time. The small group is a wonderful workshop for spiritual growth in this sense. And so the small group not only provides this opportunity for growth, but it also provides protection that builds up an almost network of energy that provides protection and help. Then these three simple steps: the establishment, the clear defining and beginning to look at and measure by. Look at first these ideals, the physical, mental, and spiritual ideals, and begin to look at them and measure our thoughts and our words and our acts by them, facing up to the self. They work with prayer and meditation at a regular, consistent, daily level. They work within the small group, these three simple steps, if we are to begin to purify the body and purify the mind. If we're going to begin to work with psychic sensitivity. If it is, as Edgar Cayce says, flowing out of, through, if it is the soul of man moving and reaching and pushing, it is the most powerful force, the most creative force in all of the universe, though it is of God. If it is working through those psychic centers, those gland centers of the body, it will bring about balance in terms of health, in terms of mental and emotional stability that you never dreamed was possible. Because they control every single thing that goes on in the human organism, these gland centers. And if they're in alignment, in balance, this is the real key, and this is what else it talks about at great length in this meditation booklet. Is it important? I say yes. I know I could tell you how to go and be psychic. I could sit some of you down here on the floor and put you in certain postures, give you certain breathing exercises, and induce a kind of psychic state with a few suggestions almost instantaneously. But you can't be spiritual that way. You can't be balanced just that way. You can't begin to deal with the self in terms of its purpose of representing God in the earth that way. The Association for Research and Enlightenment is concerned with a balanced approach to this whole concept of the growth of psychic sensitivity. It's as possible as you are possible. Edgar Cayce says we all, of course, are psychic. It's just a matter of whether you choose a lighted path or a dark path. I think what we've been talking about is a lighted path along this way of development of psychic sensitivity. Thank you.
Hope everyone enjoyed our presentation from the archives today featuring Hugh Lynn Cayce. To learn more, you can visit our website as always at edgarcayce.org. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and of course moretalk.tv, I want to thank you so much for tuning into Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Hope everyone has a wonderful week, and always remember to take time out of your day for a good laugh. Until next week, much love. And now it's time for the thought for the day here on Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. And joining us to read the thought for the day today and share in his own thoughts is Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today on Reflections.
Hi, Brenton. Great to see you again. Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Likewise, my pleasure. And if you can go ahead and read the thought for the day today and share your own personal thoughts on it.
I'd be happy to. This thought comes from reading 830-3. Hence, as has been given, know yourself, in whom you believe. Not of earthly, not of material things, but mental and spiritual, and why. And by keeping a record of self, not as a diary, but your purposes, what you have thought, what you have desired, the good that you have done, we will find this will bring physical and mental reactions that will be in keeping with the purposes for which each soul enters a material manifestation. To me, this thought brings me back to, have I set my spiritual ideal? What are my inner desires? And who do I trust to help these desires become manifested? I can apply my effort, but I can't say that I have full confidence and trust in myself to manifest all of this. So I need to go to a higher source of information and help with all of these things. And I think as I do that, it will help to guide my mental thoughts, and my physical manifestations will result from that. When he talks about, keep a record of self, not so much as a diary. I went to the store today, got some more peanut butter or whatever it is that I was doing today. But how did I feel about going to the store? What were my thoughts when I was in the store? What were my reactions to the individual that was checking me out, who threw my avocado in the bottom of my shopping bag? How did I react to all of that? And I think those are important. Did I bless that person or curse the person, when that came about? Do I have to start bagging my own groceries? What was my inner reactions to all of that? And that may sound like silly stuff, but we go through that stuff all day long,
Right.
And how are we feeling on the inside? Are we feeling peace and enjoyment, or are we feeling hassled and frazzled? I think those are the things that we really need to reflect on. When we lie down at bed at night and say, well, how'd you do today, Bill? Well, sometimes the readings talk about this. You win a few, you lose a few. But if you can reflect on them, then you can say, oh, gee, sorry about that one. Let me try harder the next time, because I was really off base with that one. I think with some of these thoughts, you can really have some fun with them. Sometimes I bring a mirror along with me. That mirror is called my wife, Diana, who can say, oh, really blew that one, Bill, and maybe in the future you could handle that a little bit differently. And of course, at that moment in time, I really don't want to hear that, but in the evening, sometimes you can reflect on how did you feel with different things as you went through the day. As you had to do your day-to-day stuff, how did it make you feel? And I think that's a reflection of how close we are with living our spiritual desires and how close we are with our relationship, or being in contact with our relationship with God, the divine forces, which is always there. We may not be mentally there, but it can be a reflection to get back with the program.
Right. Wonderful. Yeah, you raised some great points there. I love this because you talk so much about reflection, and that really resonated with me. Of course, our show is called Reflections, and it's really comes out of the Cayce material. Is that if there's one huge thing that the Cayce material does, as you read each reading and you start to apply what you gather from each reading, it builds up this reflective life, which I think is one of the most powerful things you can carry with you on your spiritual path, is having a reflective life. And what I love about this reading in particular is that Cayce gives yet another incredible suggestion in this reading, where he talks about keeping a bit of a journal, and he says not as a diary. So he's stressing the importance in this reading, saying that it's not of earthly, not of material things. You don't want to do a play-by-play, which is your typical diary is is loosely based on kind of a play-by-play of what you went through. Of course, you dive into some of what Cayce talks about here, where he says it's all about the focusing on the mental and spiritual, meaning your reactions to the things, how things made you feel, looking back. How do you feel about it going into it? Were you nervous? Did it give you excitement? And this is an incredible tool that I've been doing over the years, but it gives me focus again. I love going over the readings more because it reminds me that maybe I've strayed from writing down what I'm going through. Not so much what physically is happening, but what my mental patterns are. And the beauty, I think, of doing something like this is, a month down the line, a year down the line, 10 years down the line, you can look back at this and you can see that, okay, you'll realize that it's not so important that I was going to the grocery store doing that this day. It's the most important thing, which is why Cayce gives us this suggestion to keep this sort of journal, is that, okay, this made me angry in that moment. This caused this reaction. And then, a week later I had the same reaction. It's happening. These patterns, what you do is you get to see this big picture of basically an analysis of yourself. I mean, that's what he says. He says you're keeping a record of yourself, which is one of the most powerful practices that you can do, because you may not be able to figure out why you react to something, but if you look back and you see 20 journal entries over the past year where the same thing keeps happening, you can say, okay, here's what my mental state is, here's what my emotional state is, here's what I was going through, and you can plot out the patterns, and it can do incredible things to help you work with what you're going through on a mental and emotional level, which, as Cayce stressed, that's what's building our physical level. It's one thing to have a diary that looks at all the physical stuff, but to have that in front of you that says, this is what I was thinking on this day, this is what I was reflecting on, this is how I felt. Imagine how powerful that could be for an individual to change their life.
You talk about a wonderful tool that you're using, taking a look at your mental patterns. I like that expression, your mental patterns. What a way to get to know yourself.
Yeah.
Your mental patterns, I think, are a reflection of what your inner spiritual desires are. And those mental patterns are also going to manifest your physical life.
Right.
And it's such a powerful tool, an active tool, if you just do that. A wonderful challenge to people, and I'm saying this really for myself, is, okay, Bill, write down on a day-to-day basis what your mental patterns were like through the day. Maybe a short section of his, the guy dropped my avocado, what was my reaction? What was my mental pattern? And take a look at that over a 30-day period of time. And I think we'd get a tremendous reflection of what we're manifesting physically. Thank you for that. That's a wonderful tool.
Yeah, of course. Well, Bill, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today with us on the show. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Oh, it's great to be here, Brett. Have a great day today.
Thank you. You too.